Oh man, come on guys. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, trust me, it's a good thing to say wa alaikum assalam. It's not like, I'm asking you something crazy. For the brothers in the back in like the very last couple rows, inshallah, if you could just move forward a little bit. I didn't request it, Brother Waqar requested it. I know you guys are peacefully sitting, so apologies. But nonetheless, inshallah, today's lecture is going to be on the fundamental concept of today's lecture is going to be on adab, okay? Now, when we discuss adab and manners, you might see that, wow, there's so many youth here today. What a coincidence that we're discussing such a topic, right? Well, believe it or not, this is a topic that many communities across the country, they speak about on a constant basis. We discuss it within our homes, within our families, over the phone, whatever you name it. It's a very important discussion. The reason why it's so important is because we feel as though that our kids that are being raised in America, they have a different form of adab than we are used to. And that is 100% true, right? And the reason for that has a lot to do with them being in America itself. And there's not really too much we can forcefully change upon them because this is a society at large. And what I mean by that is that there are two distinct things that are different than where we come from. Like you could be from Pakistan, India, Egypt, Northern Africa, anywhere else in the world, except like what we call the West. And we'll just call it like America, right? What's drastically different is the fact that how involved is the government in our day-to-day lives. This is the fundamental difference, right? If we understand this, we understand everything else. If you look at it from Pakistan, you have an emergency, who are you calling, right? You're calling your family, yes? You're not calling 911. You're going to call your family members. If there's an emergency, something critical, who are you leaning on? Your family, right? And in America, you have an emergency, a situation, who are you leaning on? You can call 911, you can call the police, or you can call an ambulance, whatever. So our reliance in America is much, much more on the state, right, the government, than back at home. You call the police, you're not sure who's gonna pick up, when they're gonna show up at your house if you're from overseas, right? And some of you guys are smiling, shaking your head, because you know this is real. And so the family involvement overseas in one's life is much, much more important than it is in America. Because America, you have the reliance on the state, etc., and they have, the more profitable or the more, equipped a government is, the less reliance on family we have. And that's a fact. And there's a counselor, and he's a psychotherapist for over 25 years. His name is Marwan Deori. And he did a lot of research on this, right? So he's basically breaking this down to counselors. And he's saying, you have to understand who comes into the office. When you speak about certain concepts, you got to understand the client. And when he speaks about the client, he's speaking about your average Muslim from overseas. And he says the first drastic difference is you have to realize the people that are coming from overseas, they're so much more used to what we call a collectivist environment where basically you're reliant on your family system. And in America, you're more independent, right? That's why you don't really go out to many people's houses in America. You're more isolated, you're atomized. It's like a bubble, right, that we kind of live in. And like if we have someone come over our house, it's so strange in America, right? Why is somebody knocking at my door at 6:30 p.m.? But overseas, that's like natural, right? So it's a complete different world. And so when you're from a collectivist or family type of orientated culture, the thing is that your personality is defined ahead of time. Because if your personality is a disruption in the family, imagine each brick in a bridge, right? It has its purposeful position. And if that brick gets pulled out, then it can collapse the whole bridge. And so the personality that you're trained to have, and this is for the parents in the room, is that you're trained to be a certain way from a very young age. You have to fit a certain mold, a certain characteristics and boundaries, and it's not a bad thing, right? It's just reality and how things are. So your respect for elders is obviously tremendously a lot more, right? Because there's a hierarchical respect and tradition that you follow. And so you look at it in America and you don't have that family type of environment. And sometimes even for like the older youth who are in their 20s, you might have a hard time dealing with some of the teenagers, right, Brother Ahmed? Right? You might have some, a harder time, because you might be saying something to them, and the first generation, like us, we're so used to immediately respecting and following our parents that when we look at our younger siblings, or like, kids who are teenagers now, and we're like, what? They get away by saying no? This is impossible. Like, you can never say no to your parents, but they can. Why is that? It's because of this perception of what the family structure is like. And so, fast forward to our issue today, right? Is that when we're talking about the concept of adab, what does adab mean for us today, right? Is it what our culture told us and how to respond and react to each other? Or is it something much more deeper than that? And can we say that kids who are being raised in America don't have adab? No, that's not necessarily the case. They're just being raised in a different environment with a different set of priorities and standards. And so when we understand it from that lens, we have to realize that they're handicapped from a certain perspective in terms of how they're dealing with reality. Imagine all your brothers and sisters, you all lived in like the next 2-3 houses, and you lived in a small little community. How they would be trained and raised would be drastically different than having your own house, your own mortgage. Your sibling lives like, half an hour away from you or whatever it may be. So that being said, is that what does the Quran say when it comes to the concept of adab or manners, right? Understanding that the Quran came across generations, across cultures for all of mankind. What are the single-handedly most important things that the Quran teaches that are the fundamental pillars of all of our cultures? And because we have to realize that Islam does not come to remove a culture. Islam comes to beautify it, correct? So when we look at our culture, whether you're from the subcontinent area of Asia or you're from, the Middle East or wherever it may be, understand that yes, there are some things that are more natural in family or, countries' culture, but then there's some foundational things that all of those countries have that are built upon the essence of the Quran itself. And America has that as well. And so when we look at it from the lens of the Quran, when we look at what are the ultimate commandments Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left us, right? There's a scholar, his name is Dr. Omadi. And what he does is that he filters every single command in the Quran, right? Can you imagine how many laws, verdicts there are, etc.? And he filters them all out. And his criteria is that what are the universal messages in the Quran? I.e., when does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak to all of mankind? Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the men, the women. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to Bani Israel. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Quraysh, etc. There's different groups. But then sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns the attention to all of humanity. And so if we were to filter out all the commandments in the Quran, they come down to 15 unique commandments in the Quran. 15 that are universal messages for all of mankind to follow. And I was reading this a few weeks ago, and I was just blown away. And the first universal message is very obvious, right? Worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, that's obvious. Do you know what the second universal message in the Quran is? Anybody want to take a guess? Anyone? No? Yes. Yeah. That's the second universal message. For all of mankind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and when it comes to your parents, don't even say uff to them. Right? You guys know the verse. Don't say uff to your parents, correct? Think about it. Out of all the hundreds of commandments in the Quran, I think there's over like 600, okay? When we boil it down and you filter it to the commandments that every single culture, every single civilization, they need to follow at least these 15 things. The first thing is worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second thing is be excellent to your parents, right? And that's not a cultural thing. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. It has to be engraved in our DNAs. And the younger you are, the more important it is to understand this simple concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us immediately after worship and belief in Him, is that we have to be excellent to our parents. And obviously, the third universal message is take care of your children, right? What a coincidence. And the reason for that is because if we want to talk about manners and adab and all that, useful stuff that we know will be good for our children and for ourselves, for me, it's as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it starts in the household. It starts with your relationship with your son or daughter, and it starts with, their relationship with their parents. That is the core of who they will be when they grow up. So if they respect you, most likely they're going to respect and be kindful and mindful of other people. But if they degrade their parents, then what's going to happen? Constantly on a day-to-day basis, have no respect, no call, nothing, etc. Humiliate them, whatever it may be. Then guess what? They're going to be very comfortable in doing that to other people as well. And it's just, obviously there's outliers in these type of scenarios, but most of the time, this is what's going to happen. So when we deal with issues, right, Ahmad, right? When we deal with these issues, maybe people talk back, etc. It's because sometimes within our households, we've become to what I would say, we haven't set the standards or the expectations on what the relationship should be. And for parents, you can ask yourself, okay, so what do I have to do today to teach my kid adab, mannerisms, how to be good to me? And this advice comes from Luqman alayhi salam. It's very interesting. In the story of Luqman alayhi salam, he gives his son a series of advice. And you can imagine he's like 15, 16 years old. Like, just in our perspective, he would be a young man transitioning into early adulthood, etc. And the first thing he tells his son, out of all the things that you could tell him at that age, he says, don't associate any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, that's the greatest of injustice. And then before he gets to the next advice, wow, what a coincidence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala interjects and says, oh, by the way, speaking to all of us, that yes, this is a father-son conversation, but when it comes to the parents, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically says, and we know that these are the common verses, that be great to your parents, right? Don't be rude to them, etc. But specifically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes out of the way and honors the mother and says, and don't forget about your mother. She carried you, throughout pregnancy, weakness upon weakness. Then you have the first few years of a child's life. How difficult is that, right? There's a term, it's called terrible twos. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally references it, saying that the first couple years are going to be really, really tough. So don't forget about the things that your parents did for you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala jumps back and starts to quote Luqman alayhi salam again. And he says, when it comes to society, establish the prayers, be truthful, be patient, etc. And so the reason I bring this up is that for parents in this room, if we want to teach our kids the highest level of mannerisms, the highest level of etiquette, to be polite, excellent people, the core thing that we learn from the story of Luqman alayhi salam is that teach them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Focus on that. Bring them to seminars. When scholars come for the weekend, whether it's in Edison or it's in Parsippany or wherever it may be in New Jersey, take them to those places. Learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Teach them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you do that, like you bring them here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will teach them how to be with you. So teach them how to be with Allah. And it says, though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us through the verses of Luqman alayhi salam, and I will teach them how to be with you as parents. That's the most important thing, I would say, when it comes to mannerisms. And even if you look at Sahih Bukhari, there's a book on etiquettes and manners, right? The first hadith that Sahih Bukhari, in his collection, his first hadith in it, he says that focus on prayer. Like, he uses a narration from the Prophet ﷺ saying that the best of people are those who pray immediately when the adhan is called. They pray right away, right? They don't delay. And then after he mentions that, he says, then he quotes a few hadiths on how to be with the parents. It's very interesting. He's following the same style that the Quran is using, whether it's universal messages or from the story of Luqman alayhi salam. He's setting the tone, Imam Bukhari, by saying that yes, you start with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you pray your salah immediately on time. And you will see, if you and your kids, and you get them to do that, everything else will flow. And what is the next thing? Be good to your parents. And then it speaks, and there's some hadiths about being good to one's parents, and then what? Being good to one's kids, and then being good to one's siblings, and then blood relatives, etc. It's a standard, set of guidelines. Whether you look at hadith books, whether you look at the Quran, when we talk about mannerisms, it starts first with our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then it immediately goes into our parents. How do we interact with our parents, etc. And so for the kids in here, what can you do, right, to improve your mannerisms, polish them up, etc., is that number one, understand your own tendencies. Understand what triggers you, what upsets you, etc. You can speak to your parents about these things, but at a certain point in your life, you're going to need to understand something called self-control, patience, perseverance. And this is the next universal message in the Quran. And this is Luqman alayhi salam's advice too, is that in order to be the best version of yourself, right? I can't tell you what qualities you absolutely should have or what you need to work on, because for each of us sitting in this room, you might be at a different point in your life in terms of how you etiquettes are and how you interact with other people. But for the children in this room, just simply ask yourself, what do I need to get better at? The first thing that pops in your mind is probably the most important thing that we need to work on, yes? And so it could be, talking back, or it could be how the tone of voice or how we address people, or it could be maybe I play too many games, and when my parents tell me to stop playing, I have such an addiction to my game that I can't let go of it, causes me anxiety, causes me stress, whatever it may be, because the worst of us comes out when we can't control ourselves. I naturally think that most of us are generally good people, right? I believe we generally have the right qualities within us, but for the kids in this room, you have to understand what are the trigger points that that break you out of your normal comfort zone? What makes you become a little bit more lenient in your speech, in which you start to possibly speak disrespectfully to your elders, etc.? And so we don't have too much time. Isha is in about 7 minutes, and we have a guest speaker here as well. But when we look at the concept of adab, just taking it back for a second, and for the parents in this room, I want you to think about this, really, is that the culture, the country you raise your kids in is not the same country or culture that you live in today. And it was a benefit to us because kids' identities and personalities were already shaped at a very young age, and they weren't, it wasn't as difficult to teach them what it meant to respect your elders or don't speak to your cousin like that, because the exposure and the expectations and the tone was set so early on that it's as though it came second nature, right? You feel as though it came second nature to you, but it's not just you, it's the whole culture itself that built that type of personality. But now that you're in America, you have to understand their teachers, their school system, everything else is almost the opposite of what you expected it to be. And now that you understand that there's differences, it's not to say that American or your culture back home is better or worse. No. The question is that what are the key universal messages? For us, the number one important thing is not what my country says, but rather what does the Quran say? Because what the Quran has beautifies everything else. And there's two major lessons that the Quran teaches us. Is that the first major lesson is that after belief in Allah, right? Belief in God, not too difficult to understand, is that we have to have excellent type of personalities with our parents. And if we can't do that, then we can't get to the next step. It's as though you're trying to jump to, level 100. You're dressing nice, you have nice haircuts, you smell nice. You're trying to give off this impression that we are so good, right? We're classy individuals, we're smart, but if we can't be good to our parents, what does it matter if you dress nice? Does it matter if you have a nice haircut? Does it matter if you have a nice phone, you get good grades, you get all these things? All of these things, there's just a person on the outside that's a hollow shell because they can't be good to their parents. I saw this one documentary once where a woman was speaking about her being like a CEO of a company. And it's a very prestigious company. I forgot her name. But she says that in life, I have succeeded at every single level, right? She says, I was the best in school, I was the best in college, I was the best in my early days when I started work, etc., etc., etc. Her family life is great. But she says, my biggest regret is that I could never apologize to my father. I could never settle our differences with my father. And she says, if there's one thing I could take back in life, she says, I'll give all of these titles away, all of these trophies, these certificates, whatever you name it, whatever she's built in her life. She says, I would take it all back and make sure that the first thing I did was that my relationship with my father was solid, right? I would take it all back and I would try my best and I would reach out to him. I would call him. But now, unfortunately, I can't because he's not alive. He's not alive anymore. And so after all of that success, her biggest regret is something very fundamental to our discussion today. And so as we think about this, as you grow up through these teenage years, you go through middle school, high school, and this is the message for the younger guys in the room, is that you want to be respected. You want to be known as the best of the best. You know, when I was growing up, I had such an infatuation with the Prophet ﷺ. And the reason I had it is because I used to ask myself, how is he so beloved to so many people? You know, people have been studying the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for over 1,400 years, right? And most of the people that have studied him have came away and spoken about how great of an individual he was, how people respected him, the honor he had in society. You cannot deny any of that, right? People might have their differences in following him, but nobody can deny his greatness. And the essence of his greatness is that how he was with other people and how he taught them. And the Quran teaches us that the fundamental thing, and we know the Prophet ﷺ, his parents passed away, his father passed away before he was born, his mother passed away when he was very young, but you get to see his relationship with his uncle who takes care of him for most of his life. And his uncle loved him, right? To the max, and we know all the stories. And so if I look at our Messenger ﷺ and what defines greatness in him, it is adab. And from the Quran, we understand what is the first step of adab. It is being great to our parents. And for parents, it's being great to your kids, right? No matter how bad they are or how good they are, whatever it may be, child 1, 2, or 3, doesn't matter. Is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the third universal message in the Quran is that when it comes to your kids, understand I have given you them as a gift. And if it's a gift from me, then realize that I can take my gift away from you. So honor and respect the gifts that I have given you, and don't love the gift more than you love the one who gave the gift. And so with that being said, inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to pardon us and forgive us for any of our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate our character and our mannerisms. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to be in servitude of our parents. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to pardon and forgive all of our parents. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have His mercy upon them and bless them with Jannatul Firdaus al-A'la. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enjoin us upon a community that fosters the love of taking care of each other and taking care of our kids. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all. Jazakallahu khairun. Before we conclude and start Isha today, Brother Taj will bring up our special guest, inshallah, for tonight.